went by to Starbucks. You were going to go out to a restaurant, you decided you could make SpaghettiOs at home. Right? Okay, so, well, that you multiply that by 300 million people, and that's a lot of restaurants that are going out of business in New York right now, which, in case you didn't know, it is the case. Thousands are collapsing in New York because they have no business. Everybody is staying home and making peanut butter sandwiches. Another example, credit dries up. Suppose you have banks, for whatever reason, unwilling or unable to lend money into an economy that has become dependent on credit. People who need credit to buy things, businesses who need credit to keep going. If they can't get the credit for whatever reason, crisis. Any of these things, and many more that I could name, can produce a crisis. If they happen, it won't necessarily produce a crisis. What will determine whether a bad event of any of the sorts I've described produces a crisis? Well, the answer is the market. Because the market is the mechanism that will determine whether a potential crisis becomes an actual crisis. Because the market spreads the problem. You know that. If, for example, the consumers start saving, then businesses who suddenly can't sell as much, restaurants, for example, they go out of business. And when they go out of business, they say to the Mexican dishwasher they've employed, bye-bye, don't come to work on Monday. The Mexican dishwasher, who has no legal right to be in the United States, has no income anymore, is surrounded by other people, Mexican and non-Mexican, who are looking for the few jobs that there aren't anymore. So he's going to do two interesting things, this Mexican. A, earning no more money, he can't send money back to Mexico the way he had been doing for his family. Second biggest export of Mexico in the last 10 or 15 years has been remittances, money from Mexicans working in the United States sent home. He stopped sending the money home. Crisis number one now hits Mexico. They had no money. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is that Jose not only sends no money back, but he has no reason to stay in New York, which is very cold and wet. He wants to go back to Mexico, which at least isn't cold and wet. And he's closer to his family. So Mexico has two great disasters. The end of the remittances and the return of the people. Oh my God. To do what in Mexico? In a collapsing economy, because there's no remittances, all these people need work, which isn't there. Whoa. Hint. Mexico. Watch Mexico. It's going to blow up this semester. We'll be here to analyze it as it happens. But you now understand that the market mechanisms, what leads you to stop going to restaurants, plunges Mexico into a disaster. Contributes to that. The market shifts, spreads, infects. Every time you hear somebody give a speech about the wonders of markets, and they have some wonderful properties, always remember, like with everything else, along with the good news, there's always some bad news. And it's very dangerous to pretend that it isn't there. Markets spread the infection of downturn. And if they spread it enough, which they often do, then you have a general crisis. But please keep in mind the difference between where a crisis starts and what a general crisis is. We're going to talk about a general crisis. It can start anywhere. So, for example, the one we're going to be talking about here started in the financial sector, which has led an awful lot of people to say it's a financial crisis. No, it isn't. It is a crisis of this system. It happened to start there, true enough, and that's interesting, and we have to pay attention to that. But it could have started anywhere, and many crises have started other places. It's nothing all that important, really, about where it starts, and it is a big mistake to keep calling it with an adjective about where it started. It's really an attempt to keep it there, an attempt which has long since failed. It's everywhere now. Second thing is to understand the mechanism of the market spreading. How does that work? And for those of you who ever had any economics, what I'm about to say in English was said in your textbook at the time by this concept multiplier, which may have troubled you when you encountered it. But it's a real simple idea. Here's what it means. If A, could be anything, a firm, a person, spends less money on B, say, decides to spend $100 less on B than you used to spend. You used to go buy this bar every week and you dropped $100 on drinks. Okay? Now you're upset, so you're not going to the bar and you're not going to drop the $100. Okay? Does the impact of the economy stop with your no longer spending $100? Answer, no. Because when you don't spend $100 on the bar, the absence of $100 income to the bar means they in turn don't spend money on their suppliers of liquor, or their workers, or their electric bill, or whatever else they spend. So the impact of your withholding $100 is multiplied in terms of the economy as everybody else affected by your initial withdrawal of $100 follows with withdrawals of their own, reductions of their own spending, which in turn hurt other people. You see the process of ramification. Of course, if you didn't have a market, you might want to insulate one part of the economy from the trauma of another. You might put the difficult sector into a kind of quarantine so it didn't affect everybody else. But in order to do that, you couldn't let the market work, because the market spreads the infection. This is the argument of a critic of markets. So if it comes as a shock to you, that's because critical arguments about markets have been relatively underdone. And I want to correct the balance just a touch. It's a falling production of goods and services. Literally. Less goods and services are produced. Think of it this way: a pretty sudden, where the word sudden is measured in months, not hours or days, but months. Suddenly, over 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, something like that, the production of goods and services not only doesn't go up, it's worse than that. It doesn't stop going up, it actually goes down. Less stuff is produced this year than last. That's a crisis. Technically, for those of you that are concerned, the government or the National Bureau of Economic Research measures these things. And if you have 2 successive quarters of a year, so 6 months, in which the total output as measured by the government of goods and services goes down, that's a recession. That's announced. And this current crisis, we had a very bizarre thing. The National Bureau of Economic Research officially announced a recession in the United States in December, if I recall, of this last year, 2008, but then did something very unusual. It announced in December 2008 that the recession had begun in December 2007, a year earlier, which was strange because normally there's not that big a gap. It might, and it did certainly lead an awful lot of commentators to say the Republicans needed to postpone the official announcement of a recession because it would have hurt the chances they had already lost but didn't know it. In other words, you needed to push that back because the Republicans, being in power, would get the blame if a recession was publicly announced. We'll never know what the truth of it is, but something made a long delay, so everybody scratched their head. In the financial world that pays attention, scratched their head at this announcement that a year earlier something had happened, which somehow nobody found a way to figure out or report for 12 months. All right? So, by the way, if you read European newspapers, there's no debate. There was completely understood by every major newspaper, this was an attempt to undercut Obama's campaign for president. So it's a cut. And it is expressed, it takes the following form. In some companies, it's simply an announcement, public announcement. We are reducing the output of whatever. We're making fewer shirts, or we're shipping fewer computers, or we're closing the car factory for a month around New Year's because we can't unload the cars, or all the different, you've heard them, the terms. We're going on a holiday, we are cutting back, we are trimming, all kinds of words they're all about the same thing. We're cutting. Sometimes it's expressed in another way. Bankruptcy. That's when a company is so impacted, sells so much less stuff that it can't survive as an enterprise. It's just not making enough money to pay the bills, to earn a profit, to keep the shareholders happy, and they declare bankruptcy. There's a legal procedure. You announce to the world you're going out of business. You fire your workers, you sell your inventory and your equipment, and it's over. And there's a variety of legal ways to have that happen. Another way it expresses itself is in something called mergers, or nowadays mergers and acquisitions. That's when a company that's on the verge of disaster, instead of declaring bankruptcy, cuts a deal to become part of another company presumably in better shape than it's in, or at least the combination is in better shape than each of the two have chances to survive on their own. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, Pfizer and Wyeth, two enormous pharmaceutical companies, decided to make a merger and so forth. But many smaller companies as well. Sometimes mergers are called consolidation. In the literature, it's the same word. It means the same thing. Other companies begin to do things very famous in a downturn. They start to cut corners. They're in trouble. They can't sell as much, so they got to try to recoup the profits they would have made if they could sell as much as they had hoped for by saving here or saving there. So a company that grinds peanuts in a machine uses the same machine that used to grind hamburger meat. Since the hamburger meat has organisms that thrive in the peanut culture, you die. But you die filled with Skippy. Okay? So, which is some sort of consolation. Maybe. But corner cutting, you're going to see more and more. You cut on maintenance. You cut on extra personnel. You lay off another person over here. You get one person to do what two used to do before. You do what you have to do because often the alternative